Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us once again here at the Blue Lotus Meditation and Mindfulness Center for our bi-weekly Dharma talk, where we talk about, different aspects of Buddhist teachings and how it relates to modern day life, and how we can incorporate his ancient wisdom, right, into our modern lives without losing any of the authentic meanings and practices. So we're glad to have you here with us. And I'm Vladimir. I'm the founder of the Blue Lotus Meditation and Mindfulness Center here in Brainerd, Minnesota, which, if you're not familiar with Minnesota, it's a state in the United States, and it's in the northern parts of the United States. We border Canada, and our center is right in the center of Minnesota. And so we're delighted to have you with us this evening, whether it's your first or 200th time sitting with us. We're absolutely delighted to have you with us. So today is November 10th, 2025, and it is a minute or so after 6 p.m. here in the Central Time Zone. Just a brief announcement before we begin our Dharma talk. Donations, right? We are a 501c3 nonprofit Buddhist society, and so that means any donations that you kindly donate and send our way are tax deductible in the United States. And we have many programs that support our community, right? Members like yourself or practitioners like yourself, teens, right? During the summer months, we have a teen mindfulness camp that is generously supported by all of your contributions to help teens who may be having difficult times. And truthfully, in the 21st century, a lot of teens do, right? They have difficult times just adjusting with the fast pace of the society that we live in. It can leave young, untrained and confused minds, which way is a wholesome way for me to follow. And so our mindfulness camp helps them navigate these difficult waters for them. And then we also have our YouTube channel memberships. And so maybe you don't want to make a donation, but maybe you want to help support in another way. Our YouTube channel memberships, just $1 a month, 99 cents actually, so less than $1 a month. All those proceeds also go into helping community services, teachings and offerings and so forth, all of our programs that we offer. As well as the extra benefit for you is, you get behind the scenes videos, updates. We'll be starting members only Dharma talks and questions and answers and so forth in the upcoming month or so. So there are benefits to that as well. And either way, whether it's a donation or a YouTube channel membership, it also helps you earn merit, right? So help you do those good deeds as well to instill and help nurture those good karmic seeds. So thank you. And so let's begin with our 3 jewels, where we honor the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Satu, Satu, Satu. Very nice. So tonight we'll be talking about the economics of mindfulness. And oftentimes when we think about economics, we think about finances, right? Our pocketbook, our wallets, and so forth. And that does have some bearing on the conversation, but it is not the economics that we are really kind of focusing on, right? And we don't typically associate mindfulness and economics. And so this isn't one of a personal finance discussion or anything like that per se, right, in that sense. But how not being mindful ends up costing you and society more over time, right? So if we think about that, when we are not mindful with our decisions, right, it can hurt us, it can hurt others, and overall it can hurt society. So not just on a big picture in that sense, but, even health-wise. But when we think about economics, and this is what we can kind of associate or align mindfulness with, is it's really about resources, right? How we spend our time, how we invest our time, and how we exchange energy, right? Our time, attention, emotions, and thoughts. Those are also resources, right? So are we skillful in how we allocate and utilize those precious resources, right? Our time is valuable, right? Our attention is valuable. Our emotions, right, are certainly valuable, as well as our thoughts, right? Because a lot of times when we have a thought, there's an emotion that is attached to it. And if we aren't skillful in employing our emotions and thoughts, it can cause some detrimental effects, not just mentally, but physically to some degree as well. And so the Buddha taught that the mind, right, when trained, right, with discipline, right, becomes the most valuable asset that we have. So think about that. When we have a skillful and well-trained and disciplined mind, that is really a valuable asset, right? Something to cherish and to guard, right? But when it's untrained, it becomes our greatest liability. So think about when we have, or maybe in the past, maybe you've went off the handle. That's a term in the United States that somebody may say they lose control with their emotions, or they have an outburst, right? How many times have, in the past, have you maybe were unskillful in your emotions, and you went off the handle, right, or flew off the handle, and maybe you said something that you shouldn't have, right? And that brings about a type of emotional response, right? A sad one, maybe you regretted it, right? And so that's when we are untrained. And so discipline is an important part of mindfulness, right? Oftentimes we think of discipline as something harsh and something negative. But when we have discipline, we also have freedom and liberation, which is really what the Dharma is all about as well, right? So, how mindfulness brings abundance, both physically and mentally, and how mindlessness creates debt. That's really what we're going to be talking about throughout the course of this Dharma talk this evening. So what are some of the hidden costs of mindlessness? Right? So we think about the currency of attention, right? Every day we spend our attention on worries, distractions, anger, and cravings. How often do you find yourself worrying about tomorrow or the next moment ahead? Right? How often do you ruminate on how somebody maybe treated you poorly? Or how often do you find yourself wanting to get rid of a certain moment, whether it's in the past or in the present, in exchange for the next moment, a craving, an attachment, right? Or even an experience. Like, I can't wait for this test to be over. Right? Maybe you're a high school student or a university student, right? And so that's where our attention is lying, in the future or in the past, or with some type of a distraction, with unnecessary worry. So when we ruminate on certain events, that takes away from our balance, right? Our peacefulness. And notice the three poisons here, right? They were mentioned in there, right? The three poisons: greed, anger, and delusion or ignorance, right? And we've talked about that before, right? The currency of attention. And so when we are greedy or angry or ignorant with our understandings, right? Or those delusions of, permanence, right? That can absolutely cause us, right? Mindless behavior, right? Unskillful thoughts, unskillful actions, right? And then we can have like emotional inflation, right? So when we chase external pleasures, right, we experience emotional inflation, right? The more we get, the less satisfied we feel. So think about that. The more you have, the more you crave more because you feel like you have less. So think about that for a moment. The more you get, the less satisfied you feel. Because think about this. Once you achieve what you were looking for, do you find yourself satisfied? Do you find yourself at peace? Do you find yourself at balance? Or maybe find a little bit of happiness, right? A little bit of contentment, for a few moments. But then what? You go back to chasing more, right? And you forget about what you've just accomplished, right? For that next moment of impermanent joy, right? That could be greed to some extent, right? And thinking that that next accomplishment, that next achievement will bring about lasting and permanent liberation and happiness. It won't. We can also consider the stress that is associated with that, and stress as an interest debt. So interest, right? That's a financial term. It just builds up and builds up. Stress, anxiety, and regret. Those are all interest payments on our emotional debt, right? Stress comes from, excuse me, stress, right, and anxiety. They all come about from us wanting to control the future and outcome, right? That may or may not even happen. We certainly want a positive outcome or an advantageous outcome, but we worry about it. Does that event unfold, right? Does it come to fruition in the way we would like it to? Sometimes we even expect the worst or the negative, right? And so that all takes a toll, our interest payments on our own emotions. So when we think about that even more deeply, and this is where the economics, right, that payment comes out, right? What are some of those negative health results of stress, right? What can you think of? Heart rates go up, blood pressures go up, our immune system could be compromised. Maybe you have some digestion issues, insomnia, right? You stay up late worrying, right? What's my boss going to say tomorrow? What is going to happen, if I go to the bank for a loan or whatever it is, right? We worry about what are my test results, whether it's a school assignment or, a medical procedure, right? And all that begins to add and have a negative effect on our own well-being. And now guess what? Now you need to actually spend more money to help treat those symptoms, right? So when we're talking about the economics of mindfulness, right, we're not just talking about, again, financial aspect, right, but also the well-being. And if we don't treat ourselves well, right, wholly, holistically, and skillfully, like the Buddha teaches in his Dharma, we actually do find out that it causes negative health effects, which, do in fact cause us to spend more currency, right? Paper or coin currency, visiting doctors. When we learn how to train our mind with discipline, right? Not reacting, right? But contemplating skillfully, we find ourselves in a better state of health. And that's important. So a lot of times we think of mindfulness, or somebody may think of mindfulness. We don't, right? Because we're mindfulness practitioners. So we think we know better. But others may think that it's just, a wishy-washy type of situation or practice that has no benefit. but it does, and we know better. So the mindful economy, we can consider as mindfulness practitioners, right? Mindfulness as a wise investment. It's what you would do with your money, right? You want to invest it wisely. So mindfulness is absolutely a wise investment in our behaviors. And mindfulness is investing in the present moment where life actually happens, right? Remember, life doesn't happen in the future. Life in the past is done with. It's over, right? We can't make any changes to the past, but we can only make changes in the present moment and hope for, right, a desirable outcome, right? So mindfulness is in the present moment. And if we think of the law of diminishing cravings, when we live mindfully, the need for more decreases naturally. Because we're satisfied with what we have. We know that what we have right now could be gone. So we are satisfied and we find joy in having what we have. If you have a little roof over your head, you have more than a lot of people. If you have just a little bit of food in your pantry or in your home, you have more than a lot of people. If you have fresh water to drink and to bathe and to clean with, you have more than a lot of people already in the world. So the need for more decreases when we live mindfully. It's not something we think about, right? Because a lot of times in society, right, it's always about getting more than your neighbor, getting more than what you've had now or in the past. And so remember, the past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. It's only the present moment. And so when we are living mindfully, we are grateful for what we have in the present moment. Emotional dividends, right? With practice, mindfulness yields emotional dividends such as lower stress, better concentration, and greater compassion. And when we have lower stress, right, we're able to focus better. Right? We're able to respond with compassion towards others as well as ourselves. And so when we have lower stress, we also have lower heart rates, lower blood pressure, lower digestive or insomnia problems or sleeping issues, right? We can take care of ourselves better. And that's certainly going to save us, a trip to the doctor. Certainly with age, right? You're going to have to visit the doctor, but, for typical and normal, body ailments. But it doesn't have to be insomnia. It doesn't have to be acid reflux, right? Or high blood pressure related to, the types of foods that we eat, right? We can live mindfully, right? And taking care of ourselves. So that'll certainly save us money as well. And the physical economy, right, of where we are in the present moment, right? The cost of chronic stress, kind of mentioned this already, right? Mindlessness, right, floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline, constant market volatility. You probably heard of that before, right? Always changing. It's volatile. When we think of something that's volatile, right, it's not stable. It's very highly reactive. And we also find ourselves on a much more attentive or aggressive state of existence or of looking around, being aware, right? Instead of being relaxed, right? Adrenaline, right? That's what you get when you're trying to run away from a predator, right? When you are trying to run away from that lion or tiger or bear, right? Depending on where you are, maybe a snake, right? That's adrenaline. That gives you that speed, right? That boost of energy. And so that always being flooded in our body, in our systems, right? It's unhealthy, right? And mindfulness has a health dividend. So thinking about this, and studies do show that mindfulness lowers blood pressure and improves sleep and reducing things like inflammation in our body. Right? I don't like to talk too much about studies and so forth. But sometimes it's good to hear, maybe what the medical professionals do say. But the Buddha said this 2,500 years ago. Right? He said this 2,500 years ago, well before today's modern medicine and psychology. Right? That it improves our own well-being. Because when we have a healthy mental well-being, right? When we are calm, when we are balanced, our body responds in kind. Right? It's not always tense. Try this. I didn't think about this until just now. Or this little experiment. We used to do this a while ago. As you're sitting here, take the top of your tongue and try to push it out through your teeth. Right? Is your jaw clenched? Do you have to push it? Right? Do you have to kind of fight to get your tongue just to stick out a little bit? Because if your jaw is clenched right now and you're just sitting here listening to this Dharma talk, that's stress. Right? That's stress. Right? And you're just sitting here. So it's a little experiment, little practice tool that you can use to gauge your level of stress throughout the day. Right? Try it first thing in the morning when you wake up. You'll probably be able to just stick your tongue right out. Right? Because you woke up, you're relaxed and so forth. Unless you had a bad dream, right? If you had a bad dream, that may not be the case. And then the energy of enough, right? Mindfulness teaches us, right? Contentment. And the wealth of a mindful person is not in possessions, but it is in peace. Right? Things around you, cars, big homes, luxury items, expensive leather couches, whatever it is, right? They don't bring balance and happiness. Right? They may bring some comfort, some physical comfort when you sit around, of course, absolutely. But they don't necessarily bring peace, because impermanent objects, like a couch or a car or jewelry, right? Those impermanent items and conditions will never bring about peace. They can't. There's no peace associated with them. Right? Peace is not an intrinsic condition of a bracelet, of a car, of a home, of a diploma, right? Anything that's impermanent, right, will not have an intrinsic value of peace in it. But our minds do. So we have to develop our minds. This is where the discipline comes in. Discipline in our own well-being, or to nurture our own well-being. And so with the global economy of awareness, we also have collective mindfulness, right? Societies benefit when individuals, right, cultivate mindfulness, promoting empathy and ethical choices. Sadly, in these past 6 or 7 months or 8 months, whatever it is, pretty influential person has been saying that empathy is not helpful, right? And that is very, very incorrect, right? The Buddha teaches otherwise. And who are we going to believe more, right? Whose words are we going to have more, intrinsic value, right? Somebody fleeting in a few moments in time, or somebody who's been around, right? So the Buddha, his teachings are perfect and skillful. And so we know that promoting empathy and having empathy for ourselves and others, right, benefits society. And that's truthfully one of the reasons why we do our, like I mentioned earlier, our mindfulness camps for teenagers, because they're going to take our place when they get older. And we need to have empathetic and compassionate citizens, right? Who aren't always chasing the shiny new object, but who have that steadfast ability and who have a disciplined mind. So they're not just reacting, right? They're responding mindfully to some difficult decisions that may have to be made, and they make ethical choices, and even for us. Right? And with that collective mindfulness, right, we go from competition to cooperation. Right? Mindfulness, right, shifts us from I win, you lose, to mutual well-being. It's like truths. Right? Let's just say you have two different people, two different parties, for example. One party believes one thing, and they say it's the truth. One party says something else. They say it's the truth. Right? We can have two truths, right? Because it's all based on perspectives. But in that condition or in those circumstances, oftentimes we view it as a I win, you lose situation. Right? And that doesn't help. That continues to promote divisiveness. So the mindfulness shifts us to one of that I win, you lose, those binary outcomes, to one of cooperation, of understanding, of well-being for all of us. And the Buddha's economic model, right? Again, it's not really economics and finances, right? But true prosperity comes from the freedom of craving, ethical livelihood, and generosity. Freedom from craving, right? Have you ever been so attached to an idea or a belief about someone else that no one could tell you otherwise? So that craving, we have an attachment to this one particular belief, right? That can be hard. But that does not make us prosperous, does not make us understanding, right? Ethical livelihood, right? Whatever we do in our careers, our types of jobs, it has to be one that is kind and compassionate towards others. If we remember, right, there's a right livelihood in that Noble Eightfold Path, right, where we're not involved in weapons making or trafficking of individuals or drugs or alcohol, things along those lines, right? Poisons and so forth, right? Those types of jobs would be unethical, right? Killing of animals would be unethical. But an ethical livelihood, maybe you're an accountant. Maybe you're a shopkeeper and you sell clothing, right? A carpenter, a clay maker, right? A potter. The list goes on, right? And generosity, right? We're not stingy, right? We are helping when we can, right? Appropriately. So how do we practice these economics of mindfulness throughout our day, right? Thinking about our daily practice deposits. So we can make a deposit into our mindfulness behavior and actions daily. So simply just begin each day with mindful breathing, right? I breathe in, pause, I breathe out. And with those in-breaths and out-breaths, you can say to yourself, I breathe in a smile for myself. Pause. I breathe out a smile to you, right? And you can envision somebody else. And if you like, you can, each cycle, you can, increase that to you aspect. Maybe it's to your street, right? Or your development, or the people in your home, right? Maybe you make it bigger to your community. Maybe you make it even bigger on your next out breath to your country, Maybe you make it even bigger to your continent, right? To the whole planet, to the universe. You can always increase that that mindful breathing technique, and that will add to our spiritual savings, right? And ask before spending, does this bring peace or stress in every decision that I make? I do ask myself, how does this help me along, develop me along my spiritual journey, my mindfulness journey towards liberation? Right? Is this a purchase or an action I want to take just in the heat of the moment? Right? Or is it something that's going to benefit me, like wholly, long term? Is it going to allow me to take a step forward in my journey towards liberation? Or is it going to just satisfy a craving here on earth? Now, it's not to say every now and then I won't get a chocolate bar or something, right? Sometimes those do happen, right? But with decisions, we ask ourselves, right, is this really going to help or hurt me in those for those decisions, right? Is it going to bring peace or stress, right? And if you do decide to go for that extra chocolate bar, we have to be forgiving on ourselves, right? Or maybe you like some durian or some sticky rice with bananas, right? Those are really good. If you haven't had sticky rice with banana, go find some if you can. A lot of times here in the United States, you can get them a lot of times at those mom and pop Asian markets. They're really good. And we certainly don't want to cause ourselves stress. And then we're remembering the three poisons, right? Greed, anger, delusion, right? So when we are angry or greedy or acting with delusion or ignorance, we can employ their opposites, right? Because their opposites is the cure, right? Generosity is the opposite of greed. Loving kindness is the opposite of anger. And wisdom is the opposite of delusion. Right? So, generosity instead of stinginess. Right? Or greedy. Loving kindness instead of anger. And with that loving kindness, right? Maybe something didn't go your way. Maybe you had an expectation for somebody or some type of event, and it didn't come out the way you anticipated. So maybe we don't want to employ anger, right? Because that's going to cloud our minds. Instead, we can employ loving kindness. And what does that mean? Right? We simply just explore why. Maybe why did we have that expectation? Why did this person respond this way? Right? So that will certainly help us along our step towards bringing peace and reducing stress. And with that comes wisdom, right? We have to have the wisdom to know that there are so many variables in life, and we can be so well prepared. And what we expect to happen doesn't happen. And that's okay. Right? So when we practice mindfulness and generosity and loving kindness and wisdom, we not only help ourselves, but our society as well to improve. Right? We are actually showing others who may be unskillful in their behaviors how to respond, how to behave, how to find lasting joy, how to find lasting happiness, because we are peaceful and we are balanced. So when we live mindlessly, right, we live in debt to our bodies, to our minds, and to our hearts. But when we live mindfully, we live in surplus, right, overflowing with peace and joy. And that's important. Right? And then the true economy of life, it's not measured in dollars or possessions, but instead, in those moments of awareness, I am here. I am present in this moment. I exist. I breathe in. I breathe out. Every breath in is a gift. Every breath out or exhale is a gift. And that's what we have to be happy for. Right? That's a moment of awareness. And so, as we end up our talk for this evening, just a little bit of a thought, a little closing reflection for you to think about. And may we learn to spend our attention wisely. Invest in presence deeply and share those profits of peace with all beings. Right? And so what does that mean? Right? Those profits of peace with all beings. Share them your peace. Share with them your peace and your happiness, because they will look towards you, right? Even unwittingly as a role model. People don't want to be angry. Some people may act like they want to be angry, and they may speak loudly all the time, but nobody really and truly wants to be angry. People want to find peace and happiness. So, ultimately, you, sometimes whether you like it or not, you do end up being a role model. So our next talk is on November 24th, where we will kind of explore a little bit more on finding happiness in our suffering. We don't think about that as often, right? Usually when we're suffering, right, we're thinking about our misery, right, the uncomfortableness, but reframing mindfully, right, where's that happiness in our suffering? And so we'll explore that on November 24th at 6 p.m., right? And until then, I wish you many, many blessings. And thank you for coming this evening. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Take care, my friends.